Welcome to Dusky Lore. Close your eyes, dim the lights, and listen closely as the shadows begin to speak. Story 1. A couple of years ago, when I was in college, I decided to sell my textbooks from the previous semester on Craigslist. I was a student and I really needed the money I would get for them. I received some offers, but none of them worked out, and I started to feel pretty worried. Also, I had to sell the books urgently, since the authors usually released a new edition every year. One day, I received a message from someone saying they wanted to buy all my books. I thought they must be in the same program as me and needed the same texts. Looking back, I realized I made a big mistake. At first, this person suggested we meet at my house. I was desperate to sell, but I knew it wasn't safe to invite a stranger to my home, so I refused and suggested we meet on campus. However, they replied that they lived far away and asked to meet at a midpoint. I assumed they were also a student with limited resources and couldn't spend much on gas. So I agreed and suggested a public place that seemed safe to me. I chose a gas station I knew well, where a friend from high school worked and often covered the night shift. I told them we could meet between 12 and 3 p.m., since I had night classes and needed time to study. Also, I never felt comfortable meeting strangers at night. On the day of the meeting, the person sent me around 10 messages apologizing because they wouldn't be able to arrive during the agreed time. While I waited, I pulled out my notes to study, since we had an important exam in 2 days. 10 came and the buyer still didn't show up. Then I received another message. They said they couldn't make it to the agreed location and asked to meet somewhere else. I checked the map and saw it was an auto repair shop. I was a little annoyed, but it was only about 10 minutes away, so I agreed. However, I didn't know that area well. It had many one-way streets and dark alleys. It wasn't a safe neighborhood, and that made me very nervous. When I arrived, I received another message telling me I should wait for them in the alley behind the shop. It was a one-way street, it was already getting dark, and the neighborhood didn't feel right. I texted saying I had to go back home soon, but they didn't reply until about 10 minutes later. They only sent a short message. Almost there. At that point, I was already very angry and all I wanted was to go back home. Then I saw a completely black SUV driving up the street the wrong way. With no lights and windows so tinted it was impossible to see inside. I felt a terrible fear when I saw 4 people in hoodies get out of the vehicle. I panicked, looking for any way to escape. I couldn't move forward because the SUV was blocking the way. So I put the car in reverse and left as fast as I could. I caught a glimpse of them for a second. They stood still, with their hoods covering their faces. In that moment, I knew it wasn't worth risking my safety for a sale. From that experience, I learned several lessons. Never go alone to these kinds of meetups. Avoid meeting at night, and always choose a familiar and safe location. Story 2. I want a small house in a quiet place, with some shop nearby, but about 2 miles away. I needed the house only for 2 weeks, and of course, it had to have Wi-Fi. I found one in Wales on the island of Anglesey. It was perfect. It had a large amount of land, about 20 hectares, and it even had its own private beach and cove. I contacted the owner through Airbnb, and he told me I could stay there in as little as 2 days. I paid the rental immediately and started getting everything ready, loading my things into the car. The trip from London to the cabin took about 5 hours. The place was as isolated as the listing described. During the last 10 minutes of the drive, I didn't see a single house or a single car. The driveway led to a beautiful cottage with a garage beside it and a stunning view of the sea at the end of the garden. I parked in front of the house and unloaded my belongings. Inside, I found a kind note from the owner, Mr. Jones. It said, "I've left some milk, butter, and eggs in the fridge, along with some homemade Welsh cakes for you to try. If you need anything or have any questions, call me. My number is stuck on the fridge with a magnet." I unpacked and chose the bedroom with a sea view. Then I went downstairs, made a coffee, and tried the Welsh cakes while I sat in the living room, looking out the window at the hills. the trees, and the coastline. It was exactly what I needed. For context, I'm an author of crime novels, with more than 25 books published. However, at that time, I was going through the worst writer's block of my career. I had booked this Airbnb specifically to write, because going to special places always helps me clear my mind. I was in the middle of my latest mystery novel when, suddenly, I got completely stuck. My agent was already furious. We couldn't keep pushing back deadlines. 3 months had already passed since the last progress. That's why I sought refuge in that quiet place, cut off from the world. I slept deeply. The next morning, I opened the curtains and looked out at the garden with the beautiful sea view. Surprisingly, the sun was shining, which isn't common in Wales. I made myself a bacon sandwich, a glass of fresh orange juice, and a coffee. I spent the next hours in front of the manuscript, adding and deleting ideas without managing to move forward much. Feeling like I needed to clear my head, I decided to go for a walk. I followed the garden path, crossed a neighboring field, and reached the private beach. I sat there for a while, looking out to sea. The only thing visible was a boat anchored quite far away, off to the left side of the cove. I took my binoculars, which I had brought with me from the back door, and looked over the whole boat, but there was no one on board. The windows were tinted and it looked to be about 60 feet long, with 2 lower decks, judging by the position of the side windows. I walked all the way around the cove and went back to the house. As I got closer, I noticed the back door was ajar. I remembered closing it, although I wasn't completely sure. As a precaution, I went in carefully and checked every room. Everything was empty. I assumed maybe I hadn't closed it properly when I left. I made another coffee and sat back down in the living room, looking out at the garden. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the windowsill, there was an ashtray with cigarette butts and a blue mug. I felt a shiver. Someone had been there while I was out. They had had a drink, smoked, and been looking out toward the coast through the window. Could it have been the owner? Why would he come during my stay without telling me? I checked my belongings. The laptop, the valuables. Everything was still intact. The most unsettling part was that it didn't look like anyone had been searching for cash or valuables. Decided to call Mr. Jones, but no one answered, despite multiple attempts. I resigned myself to trying again in the morning. At around 8 p.m., I finished dinner, and before going to bed, I checked all the doors and windows, making sure they were properly locked. I also left the porch light on all night. I woke up at 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I passed by the bedroom window, I noticed a flicker of lights in the distance. I looked out and saw 2 lights moving near the cove. For some reason, maybe bravery or pure foolishness, I decided to go out and investigate. It was private property, so no one had any reason to be there. I didn't turn on my flashlight, afraid the people on the beach would see me. As I got closer, I made out the luxury yacht I had watched earlier through the binoculars. Now it was anchored in the cove, with a faint light on at the back. I heard voices speaking in a language I couldn't identify. I saw 4 people with headlamps near a dinghy. There were also 4 other small boats and at least 7 speedboats. The yacht looked like it was worth between $7 and $10 million. It seemed to me like it was some kind of private cove for millionaires. But I was almost sure that the Airbnb owner, Mr. Jones, also owned that land. I called him repeatedly, but his phone seemed to be off. I was worried those people might come back to the house. I was convinced someone had been inside during the day, using the ashtray and the mug. As I crouched to watch more closely, trying to understand what they were doing, I suddenly saw a group of SWAT officers running behind me. They aimed their weapons at me and shouted for me to put my hands up and get on the ground. Within seconds, chaos broke out. The people on the beach noticed the police presence and ran desperately toward the yacht. Later, I found out it was all an undercover operation, connected to the theft of items valued at more than $5 million. The authorities initially believed I was part of the gang as well. The Coast Guard had warned the SWAT team that the criminals might be armed. Apparently, they were using that cove as a secret meeting point. It was the perfect place, isolated, hidden, and with no neighbors for miles. Their luck, however, had run out. My friends and family say this experience would be the perfect inspiration for my next novel. When I finally spoke with the owner, he couldn't believe what had happened, or at least that's what he said. Although when I asked him to come down early that morning to speak with me, he gave me a strange, almost mocking smile. He swore he didn't know anything about what was going on, even though everything happened on his own land. Story 3. I was returning from Connecticut and had to wait 3 hours in New York before taking my next train. I felt pretty stressed, since it was the first time I had traveled that far from home. New York was exactly how I imagined it, old, chaotic, and messy. The train station I was in was dirty and packed with people everywhere. Since I had plenty of time, I decided to step outside for a while to see the streets. I stood there watching the buildings and the movement of the city, clearly looking like someone new to the place. Suddenly, some men approached me. They were acting a little strange, and that made me nervous. I didn't feel comfortable talking to strangers in such a big city, so I just ignored them and bought a hot dog from a street vendor. After that, I decided to go back to the Amtrak waiting area to wait for my train. It seemed like a good place to sit and rest. I found a chair toward the back of the lounge and made sure to position myself with my back against the wall, so I could watch the whole place without anyone behind me. In the room there was a young woman sitting on the floor with her son, who was happily playing with some Legos. The boy looked about 5 or 6 years old, and he was wearing Iron Man pajamas. I always tend to stay alert when there are children nearby, even if I don't know them. I've heard too many stories and seen too many true crime videos on social media not to be on guard. As I watched the area, I saw an older man walk in. He was wearing a long black coat, like a trench coat, and something about him made me feel uneasy. My instincts told me I should keep a close eye on him. I didn't like the hot dog I had bought, so I got up to throw it away. Right then, a voice over the speakers announced that passengers should report any suspicious behavior to the authorities. That felt pretty ironic, considering what was about to happen. When I got back to my seat, I saw the old man pulling out a camera. It might have looked like he was just reviewing photos from some trip, but if that had been the case, I wouldn't be telling this story. The man sat facing forward, but he had the camera tilted to the side, pointed directly at the child playing on the floor. I immediately stood up and went over to the mother. "Ma'am, that man over there is taking pictures of your son," I said in a low but firm voice. She thanked me right away for letting her know. I nodded and repeated that she should keep the little boy close. Then I went to find a police officer who was in the area. I told the officer what I had seen, and the officer went straight over to the old man. He asked him to hand over the camera for inspection, and what he found made my blood run cold. Inside the device, there weren't only photos of the boy, but also images of other teenage boys and girls. When the officer asked why he had taken those photographs, the man didn't answer. Instead, he tried to run away. Luckily, because of his age, he didn't get very far and he was quickly detained. I never found out exactly what his intention was in taking those pictures, but I'm sure it wasn't anything good. That experience left me with a very clear lesson. If something feels off, it probably is, and it's worth trusting your instincts to act before it's too late.